Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a myth as old as a dusty library book, one that whispers of long slumber and thorns. A story so gentle it just might lull you into your own peaceful slumber. Imagine, if you will, a kingdom hushed, not by fear, but by an inexplicable, pervasive sleep. You walk through grand halls, where sunlight streams through forgotten windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. Each particle a tiny galaxy of quiet. A feast is laid out, untouched, as if time itself held its breath mid-bite. You might notice a courtier frozen mid-bow, perhaps even a kitchen hand with a half-peeled potato still clutched in a motionless hand. It's all very charming, really, like a particularly well-preserved museum diorama, except these aren't statues, they're just sleeping profoundly. You, however, probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes in such a silent, unmoving world without accidentally tripping over a sleeping guard or mistaking a royal scepter for a very fancy walking stick. It's certainly not a place for clumsy adventurers, no sir. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fun to see how far these sleepy tales travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. When you hear Sleeping Beauty, your mind likely drifts to a very specific image: a Disney princess, a handsome prince, maybe a wicked fairy, and a spinning wheel. But the truth is, this story, or at least elements of it, have been around for what feels like eons, tucked away in the forgotten corners of folklore, long before anyone ever thought to animate a talking teacup. It's not just a European invention either, as some might assume. Versions of a magically induced, prolonged sleep and subsequent awakening pop up in a surprising number of cultures, stretching back much further than the familiar, Grimm or Perrault versions we often encounter. Think of it less as a singular, fixed narrative. For instance, you can find echoes of this deep slumber in ancient Celtic myths, where heroes might fall into enchanted sleeps that last for years, only to awaken in a changed world, often encountering strange, otherworldly beings. These aren't always about a princess waiting for a kiss, mind you. Sometimes it's a warrior, or even a whole community, under the sway of a powerful, often benevolent, magic. There's a particular quiet reverence to these older tales, a sense that sleep itself is a liminal space, a bridge between worlds, rather than just a plot device. It's less about being rescued and more about the passage of vast stretches of time under a magical influence, like hitting the snooze button on history for a few centuries. Then, of course, you have your classical Greek and Roman myths. While not a direct Sleeping Beauty tale, stories like Endymion, the beautiful shepherd granted eternal youth and sleep by the moon goddess Selene, certainly touch upon the theme of prolonged, enchanted slumber. Endymion's sleep isn't a curse, it's a gift, allowing him to remain forever young for his divine lover. You can imagine him, perfectly still, on a mountainside, bathed in moonlight, a rather enviable way to spend eternity, if you ask me, certainly better than endless paperwork. This speaks to a fascinating historical fact. Throughout antiquity, sleep wasn't just seen as a biological necessity, but often as a state imbued with spiritual or magical significance, a time when the veil between worlds thinned, or even a form of minor death. Historians still argue whether these ancient motifs directly influenced the later European fairy tales, or if they represent a kind of universal human fascination with the mysteries of sleep and awakening. It's a bit like asking if all the world's rivers flow from one single spring, or if rain just falls everywhere eventually. There's a scholarly debate, for example, about whether the widespread motif of magical sleep originates from very early human observations of coma or trance states, perhaps even incorporating practices from ancient shamanistic traditions, where sleep was a gateway to other realms. It's not hard to imagine how a deep, unresponsive slumber might have been interpreted as divine intervention or powerful magic in a world without modern medicine. So, the idea of someone falling into an unnatural sleep, lasting for ages, has been percolating in the collective human consciousness for a very, very long time. From the misty realm of ancient slumber, our tale begins to crystallize, settling into the familiar, yet still deeply soothing, setting of briar roses, enchanted forest. The trees here aren't the gnarled, angry sort you find in other fairy tales. No, these are ancient, benevolent giants, their branches interlocking overhead like the vaulted ceiling of a grand, forgotten cathedral. Sunlight, when it pierces through, filters down in dappled, shimmering patches, illuminating the forest floor in a way that feels almost ethereal. This isn't a forest of danger, not in the traditional sense. There are no snarling wolves or wicked witches lurking behind every moss-covered boulder. Instead, the very air hums with a peculiar stillness, an almost suffocating sense of peace. The undergrowth, thick with briars and thorny roses, is not menacing but rather a protective embrace, a natural barrier that has grown up around a precious secret. You might reach out and touch a rose, its petals soft and velvety, but be careful of the thorns. They prick, not with malice, but with a gentle warning, a subtle suggestion to keep your distance, to respect the profound quiet that reigns within. It's the kind of place where you'd expect to find pixies napping on toadstools and squirrels, whispering secrets to ancient oaks. The emphasis here is on the gradual, almost organic growth of this protective barrier. It didn't just spring up overnight. This natural, almost serene engulfment by nature is a key element that distinguishes the Sleeping Beauty myth from other tales of cursed places. It's not a place of active malevolence, but of suspended animation, a bubble of timeless calm. You could wander for hours, and the only sounds you'd hear would be the soft rustling of leaves and the gentle hum of forgotten magic. Consider the sheer scale of this overgrowth. It's not just a few bushes. It's an entire forest of thorns, so dense and intertwined that it becomes an almost impenetrable wall. But even their songs might be muted, respectful of the great silence within. This lush, verdant barrier serves as a kind of physical embodiment of the magic itself, a verdant cloak thrown over a sleeping world. Historians still argue whether the detailed descriptions of such impassable natural barriers in folklore reflect actual historical phenomena, like forgotten ruins becoming overgrown, or if they are purely symbolic of the profound difficulty in breaking ancient curses. It's possible that early storytellers were simply inspired by derelict castles slowly being reclaimed by nature, seeing in their crumbling walls and encroaching vines a metaphor for forgotten time. The very slowness of this engulfment contributes to the sleepy, unhurried feel of the myth. It's not a sudden, dramatic transformation, but a languid creep of tendrils and thorns. a patient unfolding that mirrors the extended sleep of the inhabitants. You can almost feel the moss growing on the ancient stones, hear the quiet click of a thorny branch slowly unfurling. It's a quiet, persistent magic, a subtle reminder that some enchantments unfold at their own pace, entirely unconcerned with human impatience. This focus on natural, slow processes is what makes the setting so uniquely soothing. It invites you to imagine the slow, steady progress of nature, reclaiming what was once a bustling kingdom, turning it into a verdant, silent monument to a powerful, if slumberous, spell. It's a remarkably effective method for creating an atmosphere that makes you feel like you, too, should just take a long, peaceful nap. As you drift deeper into this verdant hush, you can almost feel the air thicken with the weight of the prophecy's shadow. It hangs over the sleeping palace like a silent, inescapable cloud, born from words spoken long ago. Words that sealed the fate of a beloved princess. You see, this wasn't some random, unfortunate incident. It was a cosmic appointment, set in motion by a forgotten invitation, and the potent, unyielding magic of a truly miffed fairy. It's a classic setup, isn't it? Someone gets left off the party guest list, and suddenly, everyone's in for a really long nap. You'd think by now, royalty would have learned to just send out blanket invitations to all the magical folk, just to be safe. Better to have too many fairies at the christening than one vengeful one. The prophecy itself is stark in its simplicity, yet terrifying in its implications. The princess shall prick her finger on a spindle and fall into a sleep like death, lasting 100 years. Imagine hearing those words. You'd probably want to lock up every spinning wheel in the kingdom, wouldn't you? And that's precisely what the distraught king and queen did. Every spindle, every distaff, every single piece of equipment that could possibly harbor a sharp point capable of drawing a drop of royal blood was meticulously collected and destroyed. You can picture the royal guards, probably looking rather bewildered, carting off mountains of spinning paraphernalia, perhaps muttering about how this was definitely not what they signed up for in the Royal Guard training manual. Protect the kingdom from invaders, sure. Protect the princess from ... knitting. But here's the insidious part of prophecies, isn't it? They have a way of finding their path, of weaving themselves into existence, no matter how many precautions you take. It's almost as if fate has a wry sense of humor, finding the most unlikely loophole to fulfill its decreed destiny. The threat isn't just the sleep. It's the inevitability of it. You can build walls, burn tools, and hire extra nannies. But the shadow of that pronouncement still looms, a constant, low hum of dread beneath the surface of the kingdom's forced cheerfulness. It makes you wonder, if you were a royal parent, how do you even begin to prepare for something so absolute? Do you explain it to the princess as she grows up? Darling, one day you're going to touch something pointy, and then it's a century-long nap for you. Try to enjoy it. Not exactly bedtime story material, is it? The implication here, the quiet dread, is that this isn't just about a curse. It's about the very nature of destiny and free will, a common theme in Greek mythology, by the way. Think of Oedipus, always trying to escape his fate, only to run straight into it. The Sleeping Beauty myth plays with this idea on a grander, more atmospheric scale. The impending doom isn't a sudden, violent confrontation. It's a slow burn, inevitability, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon, moving at its own unhurried pace. A curious quirk, often overlooked in the familiar versions of the tale, is the detail of why the fairy was so angry. Some of the older, lesser-known variations suggest it wasn't just a forgotten invitation, but a perceived slight, a long-standing rivalry, or even a misunderstanding of ancient courtesies. It adds a layer of petty, human-like drama to the grand magic, doesn't it? As if even powerful fairies could be a bit dramatic. Historians still argue whether the persistent motif of an uninvited guest bringing a curse reflects ancient social anxieties about exclusion, or simply serves as a convenient plot device to introduce conflict. Regardless, you're left with the palpable sense of a kingdom holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, or, in this case, for a finger to prick. It's a truly uncomfortable limbo, isn't it? Knowing something awful is coming, but not knowing exactly when or where, just adding to the quiet tension of the story. And all you can do is wait, and perhaps try to avoid any sharp objects yourself. You can almost feel the stifling weight of the royal parenthood's hope, a desperate, palpable longing to defy fate. Imagine the king and queen, not as stoic monarchs, but as anxious parents, pacing the polished floors of their castle. Their sleep, undoubtedly as disturbed as yours might be if you had a century-long nap hanging over your child's head. They've heard the fairy's chilling decree, felt the cold tendrils of inevitability, and yet they are consumed by a very human, very poignant desire to protect their precious daughter. Their initial reaction, as you might recall from earlier, was swift and decisive, if a tad bit overzealous. A kingdom-wide ban and destruction of all spinning wheels. You can almost see the royal decree being hammered to the palace gates, perhaps next to a drawing of a menacing spindle, looking rather innocent for something so capable of wreaking magical havoc. It's a bit like trying to prevent a paper cut by banning all paper in the world, isn't it? A noble effort, but perhaps not entirely practical, nor, as we know, effective. Beyond the logistical nightmare of collecting every sharp, pointy object, there was the sheer emotional weight, this constant vigilance, this hyper-awareness of every potential danger must have been utterly exhausting. You're not just guarding against a curse. You're guarding against destiny itself, which, as any good myth connoisseur knows, is generally a losing battle. It's a bit like trying to stop the tide with a teacup. While one couldn't entirely undo the wicked fairy's curse, she could soften it. Instead of a sleep like death, it would be merely a sleep from which the princess would one day awaken. This particular detail is a fascinating historical fact. Many early versions of this tale did not include this softening, making the curse far more absolute and grim. It's almost as if the collective unconscious decided that a full-on, irreversible demise was a bit too much for a bedtime story. This softening of the curse is where the parents' hope found its fragile footing. They couldn't prevent the sleep, but they could ensure its temporary nature. This pivotal moment means that their efforts shifted from preventing the inevitable to preparing for the long wait. They had to come to terms with the idea that their daughter would essentially vanish for a century, only to reappear as if no time had passed. It raises all sorts of practical questions, doesn't it? Who would look after the sleeping kingdom? How would the royal line continue? These are the sorts of logistical headaches that even magic doesn't entirely solve. It speaks to a deep human need for a glimmer of hope, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So, you have these two figures, the king and queen, embodying parental love and desperation, trying to outwit a magical fate. And in their efforts, they demonstrate a quiet resilience, a refusal to completely surrender to the ominous shadow that had fallen over their cherished child. They held on to that slender thread of hope, like a person clinging to a single, delicate cobweb in a very dark room, trusting that one day their princess would simply wake up, none the worse for her century-long nap. Despite the king and queen's valiant efforts to banish every pointy object, destiny, as it often does in these grand old tales, found its own peculiar route to the spindle's ironic twist. Imagine the princess, now a blossoming young woman, perhaps around 16, full of curiosity and a gentle spirit. A palace that, despite its grandeur, probably had more than a few dusty, overlooked nooks. It's a testament to the sheer size of these ancient royal residences that something as profoundly dangerous as a forbidden spinning wheel could simply be misplaced, or perhaps, more accurately, hidden away so well that it was forgotten even by those who had so meticulously hidden it. Or perhaps a disused wing that smelled faintly of forgotten lavender and aged parchment. She stumbles upon a tiny, hidden room. It's the kind of place you'd expect to find old royal board games, or maybe a surprisingly comfortable armchair for a quick nap. But instead, there it is, an old woman bent over a peculiar contraption, her fingers nimbly working at something the princess has never seen before. A spinning wheel. To us, it's a mundane object, but to her, in a world where such devices had been meticulously eradicated, it must have seemed utterly fascinating. A forbidden fruit, perhaps, but one that promised only the quiet hum of industry, not the sting of a curse. You can almost feel the pull of curiosity. "What are you doing, good woman?" she might ask, her voice soft and inquisitive. And the old woman, who, in some versions, is the disguised wicked fairy herself, or simply a proxy of fate, would offer a benign, perhaps even slightly encouraging, reply. And there it is, the perfect, unassuming trap. It's not a grand confrontation, no magical duels or fiery spells. It's a quiet, almost domestic moment, made terrifying by its very normalcy. The princess, never having seen a spindle, reaches out a hand, perhaps to feel the soft wool, or to mimic the old woman's movements, and then a tiny prick, a single drop of blood. It's not a dramatic gash, no torrent of crimson. It's just a pin. But that single, innocuous drop is enough. The magic, patient and unyielding, snaps into place. The sudden silence is the most striking thing. Not a scream, not even a gasp. Just an immediate, profound quiet. The princess doesn't fall dramatically. She simply drifts into a deep, serene sleep, as if gently lowered onto a velvet cushion. The spindle, having fulfilled its grim purpose, perhaps spins just one last, slow turn before falling silent. It's a beautifully ironic twist, isn't it? All the grand efforts, the kingdom-wide search and destroy mission, foiled by a single, forgotten object in a dusty room. It highlights the peculiar truth that sometimes the most profound events unfold in the quietest, most unassuming ways. You can try to control every variable, every sharp edge, but fate, it seems, always finds a loophole. This moment, the activation of the curse, is a central, unavoidable plot point, a mainstream historical fact in the narrative of this particular myth. It's the hinge upon which the entire story turns, ushering in the long period of enchantment. A quirky tidbit found in some lesser-known versions suggests that the old woman wasn't just a random crone, but a disguised entity who had been patiently waiting for years, tending to this one hidden wheel, almost like a gardener tending a particularly potent, dangerous bloom. Historians still argue whether the motif of an accidental encounter with a magical object reflects ancient anxieties about dangerous technologies, or simply serves as a narrative device to make the curse's activation seem fated rather than preventable. It adds a layer of gentle inevitability, a soft sigh of "it was always meant to be." And with that subtle, almost imperceptible prick of a finger, the entire world around the princess begins its own slow, gentle drift into slumber. The moment the princess's finger encountered the spindle, a strange, profound hush fell over the entire palace, ushering in the kingdom's collective slumber. You might imagine a sudden crash, a dramatic fall, but no, the magic was far more gentle, far more insidious in its pervasive reach. It was less like a spell being cast, and more like a collective sigh, slowly emptying the air from every living being in the castle. One moment, the court was bustling. Perhaps a servant was polishing a silver platter. A cook was stirring a pot of simmering stew. Children were playing quietly in a sunny courtyard. The next, a profound stillness descended, as if the very breath of life was drawn in and held, never to be released. Imagine standing in the throne room. The king, perhaps mid-sentence in a royal decree, simply froze, his hand half-raised, a placid expression on his face. The queen, seated beside him, might have been in the middle of a delicate embroidery stitch, her needle poised, a thread caught between motionless fingers. You can almost hear the gentle thud as a dropped royal document softly hits the carpet. Its sound swallowed by the sudden, all-encompassing quiet. It's not violent, or even startling, it's merely still, as if someone pressed a giant, magical pause button on reality itself. This wasn't just a handful of people, it was everyone. The bustling kitchen, filled with the aroma of roasting meats and freshly baked bread, became a frozen tableau. A chef, perhaps reaching for a spice, now stood suspended in mid-reach, a faint smile on his lips. The dough in the bread oven, instead of rising to golden perfection, simply ceased to swell, becoming a silent, unbaked monument to interrupted industry. Even the palace cat, curled on a sun-drenched windowsill, stopped purring mid-drumble, its tiny paws tucked neatly beneath its sleeping head. Every living thing, down to the smallest mouse in the pantry, succumbed to the same pervasive enchantment. The sheer scale of this collective slumber is a mainstream historical fact within the narrative of the myth. It's not just the princess, but her entire world, drawn into her magical sleep. This detail elevates the curse from a personal tragedy to a cosmic event, affecting an entire kingdom. It's a bit like an unexpected power outage, but instead of losing electricity, everyone just stops forever. Or, well, for 100 years, which, in human terms, feels pretty close to forever, doesn't it? You'd probably find it oddly soothing, this complete absence of noise, this profound peace. No bickering courtiers, no demanding royals, just utter, unwavering silence. A quirky tidbit, often overlooked, is the state of the palace's daily operations. Were the fires still burning? Did the candles melt down to nubs? Most tellings imply a suspension of all normal processes, a kind of magical stasis that preserved everything as it was, from the half-eaten meal on the table to the unread book on a nightstand. This suggests a form of magic that went beyond simply inducing sleep. It gently paused the very progression of decay and entropy within the castle walls. Imagine if you could just hit pause on your chores, only to pick them up a century later, as if no time had passed. Quite convenient, actually, for avoiding laundry. Historians still argue whether the motif of an entire kingdom falling asleep with its monarch reflects ancient societal views on the symbiotic relationship between a ruler and their people, or if it simply emphasizes the extraordinary power of the magical curse. Was the kingdom so entwined with its princess that its fate was inextricably linked to hers? Or was it just easier to write the story that way, avoiding the messy questions of who runs the place for 100 years? Regardless, you're left with this indelible image of a vibrant, living world transformed into a perfectly preserved, deeply quiet diorama, patiently awaiting the faintest whisper of an awakening. And as you imagine this perfect stillness, you can almost feel yourself drifting. As the kingdom fell into its profound slumber, you might imagine the palace simply dissolving, but no. Instead, it entered a state of graceful, almost artistic, enchanted palace decay. This wasn't the harsh, destructive decay of abandonment you might expect, where mold creeps quickly and wood rots in a season. Oh no, this was a gentle, almost poetic dissolution, a slow dance with time itself. You can picture it, the grand stone walls gradually softening under a blanket of moss, the meticulously carved gargoyles on the eaves slowly acquiring delicate green beards. Sunlight, which once streamed boldly through polished windows, now found its way through panes clouded by a century of undisturbed dust, casting long, ethereal shafts of light onto the sleeping forms within. The courtyards, once bustling with foot traffic and the clip-clop of horses, slowly became choked with an ever-thickening carpet of ivy and wild roses, the very same briars that began to intertwine around the castle walls. It's as if nature, seeing an opportunity for a really long nap of its own, decided to politely reclaim its territory, but without any rush or aggression. The fountains, which once bubbled with crystal-clear water, might have long since dried, their basins now cradling miniature ecosystems of ferns and tiny wildflowers, each bloom a silent testament to the passage of seasons unseen by human eyes. You might even find a long-forgotten squirrel's nest tucked into the spout of a decorative lion's head, a cozy, quiet home for generations of woodland creatures. Consider the interior of the palace. The tapestries, once vibrant with scenes of royal hunts and courtly love, would have faded to muted hues, their threads softened by the quiet touch of time. Dust, the gentle, omnipresent sculptor of forgotten places, would have settled everywhere, a fine, silvery powder covering every surface, every piece of furniture, every sleeping face. It's not grim, though. It's more like looking at an antique photograph, where the colors have mellowed and the edges have softened. You can almost smell the faint scent of aged wood, dry parchment, and the clean, earthy aroma of the encroaching forest. This controlled, almost beautiful decay is a mainstream historical fact within the folklore surrounding Sleeping Beauty. Unlike real abandoned buildings that succumb quickly to damp and rot, the magic here ensures a kind of preservation, a suspension of active deterioration. It's as if the palace itself is holding its breath, waiting, simply waiting. This makes the eventual awakening all the more striking, as if waking from a long, quiet dream. You wouldn't find crumbling plaster and collapsed roofs, but rather a world perfectly preserved under a silken blanket of time and dust. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is the state of the more delicate items. Were the royal gowns still hanging, perfectly preserved in their wardrobes? Did the intricate lace retain its form? Most versions imply a nearly perfect stasis, suggesting a magic that was incredibly comprehensive, extending even to the molecular level. Imagine a single drop of spilled wine caught mid-drip on a tablecloth, simply frozen in time, waiting for a century to finally splash. It's an almost obsessive level of magical detail, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the motif of a beautifully decaying castle reflects medieval aesthetic ideals of ruins, or simply serves to visually emphasize the vast passage of time the curse entails. It creates a powerful contrast with the later reawakening, making the return to vibrancy all the more potent. So, as you picture this ancient, slumbering palace, slowly being embraced by the natural world, softly decaying yet perfectly preserved, you can almost feel the deep, quiet pull of that stillness, inviting you to join its century-long repose. Within the gently decaying embrace of the enchanted palace, a truly peculiar phenomenon took hold: time's unchanging flow, or rather, its utterly changed flow. You see, while centuries ticked by in the bustling world outside, within the thorny walls, time itself seemed to stretch and distort, becoming a mere whisper, a prolonged, endless moment. It's as if the very fabric of existence inside the castle had been put into a deep freeze, not just for the people, but for the light, the air, even the dust motes suspended mid-dance in the sunbeams. Imagine you're standing in a quiet, forgotten ballroom. A grand clock, perhaps gilded and ornately carved, stands in a corner. Its pendulum, you'll notice, is perfectly still, forever poised mid-swing. The hands, frozen at the exact moment the curse took hold, tell a tale of arrested time. This isn't just a broken clock, it's a symbol of how the very concept of minutes and hours ceased to have meaning here. The sun might rise and set outside, the moon might wax and wane, but within the castle, the light would remain perpetually diffused, the temperature consistently cool, as if the castle itself was in a timeless, comfortable coma. This bizarre suspension of time is a mainstream historical fact in the myth, crucial to the story's logic. If time truly progressed normally within the castle, the sleeping inhabitants would have aged, withered, and eventually turned to dust. The magic, however, ensures their perfect preservation, allowing them to remain exactly as they were the moment the spell took hold. It's the ultimate form of anti-aging, isn't it? Just fall asleep for a century and wake up looking precisely the same. If only real life worked that way. Imagine skipping all those awkward teenage years. The implication here is profound. The magic wasn't just about putting people to sleep. It was about creating a self-contained temporal bubble. Decay was minimized, as we discussed earlier, but so was any process dependent on the relentless march of time. Food on platters might not spoil. Flames in sconces might remain perpetually extinguished, yet ready to reignite. Even the very air might not grow stale. It speaks to a level of magical power that transcends mere enchantment, bordering on a localized manipulation of physical laws. A quirky tidbit often pondered is what happened to sounds. Did the last note of a lute, played by a sleeping musician, simply hang in the air for 100 years? Did a dropped utensil, mid-clatter, remain silent for a century, only to complete its fall upon the awakening? The myth implies an absolute cessation, a quietude so profound it's almost deafening. It's the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of your own breathing, the soft thump of your heart in your chest. Historians still argue whether the motif of suspended time reflects ancient philosophical ideas about eternity or simply serves to underscore the profound magical barrier isolating the enchanted kingdom from the normal world. Perhaps it's a commentary on the fleeting nature of human life compared to the timelessness of magic. You see, the outside world moved on. Empires rose and fell, technologies advanced, fashions changed, but within the thorny embrace, nothing stirred. No one grew older, no one grew wiser, no one even needed a haircut. For those inside, it was but a blink, a prolonged moment of unconsciousness. For those outside, it was a long, slow century, a generational gap of epic proportions, waiting for the magical alarm clock to finally go off. As the enchanted palace lay nestled in its temporal bubble, the outside world, oblivious to the paused lives within, continued its relentless march, and with it came the whispers of the legend. You can almost hear it, a faint rustle of hushed tones carried on the winds of time, drifting from village to village, kingdom to kingdom. At first, it might have been a vivid, terrifying rumor, a princess cursed to sleep, an entire court frozen in time, surrounded by an impenetrable forest of thorns. Over the decades, perhaps even a century, the details would soften, blur, and reshape themselves, transforming from a frightening event into a fantastical tale told by grandmothers to wide-eyed children, by minstrels in bustling taverns, and by scholars poring over ancient texts. Imagine a group of farmers gathered around a crackling fire on a cold night. One might lean in and, in a low voice, recount the story of the sleeping palace, a place where time stood still. They say he might begin, that if you listen closely on a clear night, you can still hear the faint breathing of the king, or the gentle sigh of a lady in waiting. Of course, it would be pure fantasy, but the power of such a narrative lies in its ability to captivate and endure. This oral tradition, passing from generation to generation, ensures the tale's survival even as the direct memory of the event fades into myth. The fascinating part about these whispers is how they transform the frightening reality into a soothing legend. What was once a source of terror becomes a subject of wonder, perhaps even a gentle bedtime story. The sharp edges of the curse dull over time, smoothed by the retelling. The wicked fairy's malice morphs into a more generalized, almost benign magical force. The sleep like death softens into the long slumber. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to soften harsh realities into palatable narratives, often with a hint of romanticism. You probably do something similar when you exaggerate a minor mishap into an amusing anecdote, don't you? It's just human nature to embellish and round out the rough edges of truth. This gradual transformation from recent event to enduring legend is a mainstream historical fact in the study of folklore. Stories evolve, taking on characteristics that make them more memorable, more comforting, or more aligned with the prevailing cultural values. The details that were once terrifying, the inevitability of the curse, the frozen expressions of the sleeping court, become the very elements that lend the tale its peculiar, almost mesmerizing charm. It becomes less about the danger and more about the profound peace of a world suspended. A quirky tidbit that sometimes surfaces in scholarly discussions is the idea that the legend itself acted as a protective charm, discouraging casual adventurers. The stories of failed attempts, of brave knights vanishing into the thorny thicket, served as natural deterrents, making sure that only those truly destined, or perhaps truly foolhardy, would even attempt to breach the magical barrier. So, the The whispers weren't just idle tales, they were the first line of defense, a velvet rope wrapped around a sleeping kingdom. Historians still argue whether the widespread dissemination of such legends across diverse cultures reflects a common human fascination with themes of enchantment and rebirth, or if it points to an ancient, shared source for many European fairy tales. Regardless, these whispers ensure that the sleeping princess is never truly forgotten. She becomes a figure of quiet anticipation, a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. And as those whispers drift across the centuries, you can almost hear them blending with the gentle hum of the wind through the briars, inviting you to dream of quiet magic. As the whispers of the sleeping princess drifted across the land, they inevitably spurred curiosity, and with curiosity came the brave princes and failed attempts. Imagine the parade of hopeful, perhaps slightly misguided, adventurers who, over the course of a century, heard the legend and decided they were the one. You can picture them, shining armor gleaming or perhaps just rust-stained chainmail by the time they reached the forest, their horses snorting impatiently at the edge of the impenetrable briar patch. Each one, convinced of their own heroism, must have ridden towards that silent, thorny wall with a mix of bravado and, perhaps, a healthy dose of naivety. These weren't necessarily evil, nor were they particularly clever by the sounds of it. They were simply, well, brave, in that straightforward, charge problem with a sword kind of way that was so popular in medieval storytelling. You can imagine the typical scenario: a young knight, perhaps fresh from some minor dragon slaying or a particularly fierce joust, hearing the tale in a smoky tavern. The promise of a beautiful princess, a sleeping kingdom, and undying fame must have been an irresistible lure. 100 years of sleep, Shaw, a mere catnap for a true hero, he might declare, probably after a few too many flagons of ale. The crucial detail, though, is that they all failed. Spectacularly, sometimes. The briars, remember, weren't just ordinary thorns. They were enchanted, designed not to kill, but to trap. You can almost hear the frustrated grunts as a knight's horse rears back, its legs hopelessly entangled. Or perhaps a brave soul dismounts, attempting to hack through the dense thicket with his trusty sword, only to find the thorns growing back faster than he could cut them, forming an impenetrable living wall. Some versions of the myth even suggest that the briars would twist and turn, catching the unlucky adventurers, holding them fast, until they too fell into a deep sleep, perhaps leaning against a thorn-covered tree, their armor slowly being enveloped by the verdant growth. It's a rather charmingly passive-aggressive form of defense, isn't it? Oh, you want to get in? Well, feel free to try, but you'll just end up joining the nap party. This succession of failed attempts is a mainstream historical fact within the narrative of the myth. It serves a crucial purpose: to emphasize the power of the curse, and to prove that the princess's awakening isn't about brute force or conventional heroism, but about destiny and the right timing. It sets up the eventual successful prince as truly unique, not just another valiant fool. You wouldn't want just any prince wandering in and spoiling a perfectly good century-long nap, would you? A quirky tidbit found in some folklore analyses is the idea that these failed attempts actually contributed to the legend, making it even more mysterious and daunting. Each vanished knight added another layer to the castle's reputation as an impossible, almost sacred place. The forest became known as a graveyard of ambition, a silent warning to the overconfident. Imagine the local villagers pointing to a particularly dense part of the thorns and whispering, "They say Sir Reginald tried there and was never seen again." Historians still argue whether the repeated failure of early heroes in fairy tales reflects a societal skepticism towards brute force, or simply builds suspense for the eventual destined success. It highlights the idea that some problems can't be solved by simply swinging a sword. They require a different kind of intervention, or perhaps just the right cosmic timing. So, while these brave princes certainly provided entertainment for the storytellers and a cautionary tale for the ambitious, their ultimate contribution was merely to fertilize the growing legend and make the briars even thicker, patiently waiting for the one who was truly meant to break the spell. Amidst the grand, sweeping narrative of the sleeping kingdom and the brave but ultimately fruitless attempts to awaken it, let's not forget a crucial, calming intervention: the fairy godmother's gift. You might recall from the christening ceremony that set this whole long nap saga in motion, there wasn't just one spiteful fairy. Oh no, there were several others, generally benevolent, who had already bestowed their blessings upon the infant princess. And it was one of these, a particularly quick-thinking and compassionate fairy, who managed to soften the sting of the original curse. Imagine the scene at that christening. All the good fairies have bestowed their gifts: beauty, grace, kindness, perhaps even a knack for solving riddles or perfectly organizing one's sock drawer. Then, the uninvited, grumpy fairy makes her dramatic entrance and delivers the dreaded prophecy: a prick on a spindle, a sleep like death. The court is in an uproar, tears flow, and despair sets in. But then, one of the good fairies, who had not yet given her gift, steps forward. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief, a ripple of hope through the horrified onlookers. She couldn't undo the curse entirely, for a fairy's pronouncement, once spoken, is incredibly difficult to completely negate. It's a bit like trying to unring a bell, or a particularly spicy chili. Once it's out there, it's out there. However, she could modify it. Instead of a sleep unto death, the princess would merely fall into a deep slumber, 100-year nap, from which she would eventually awaken. This crucial alteration is a mainstream historical fact in the most widely known versions of the Sleeping Beauty myth. Without this softening, the story would simply be a tragedy, and not a very soothing one at that. It's the difference between a nightmare and a very, very long daydream. This gift transforms the curse from an absolute end into a prolonged pause, a mere interlude before a destined reawakening. It speaks to the nuanced nature of magic in folklore, where even powerful spells can be bent, though rarely broken. This act of mitigation highlights a charming quirk of fairy logic. There are rules, even for powerful magical beings. One fairy can't simply stomp on another's curse with a bigger, louder curse. There's a delicate balance, a kind of magical etiquette that must be observed. So, the benevolent fairy finds the loophole, the clever workaround, ensuring that life, however temporarily suspended, will eventually return. It's almost as if she's saying, "All right, fine, she'll sleep, but only for a bit, and then she'll be right as rain, maybe just a little groggy." The psychological impact of this softening for the royal parents, whom we discussed earlier, must have been immense. Their despair would have been tempered by this sliver of hope, transforming utter grief into a long, arduous wait. It means they weren't just watching their daughter succumb to death, but merely to an extended magical coma. It's like knowing your loved one is going to be in a very long, magically induced, medically safe nap, rather than ... Well, you know. Historians still argue whether the consistent inclusion of a softening charm in these tales reflects a fundamental human optimism, a narrative necessity for a happy ending, or perhaps ancient beliefs in mitigating fate through divine intercession. It's a fascinating debate, touching on the very purpose of storytelling. This gift, however, ensures that the deep slumber is merely a phase, a long winter's nap, rather than a permanent night. And as you picture this gentle mitigation of fate, allowing for the slow, quiet passage of time, you can almost feel yourself drifting off into your own soft slumber, knowing that even the harshest of fates can sometimes be softened by a touch of kindness. While the princess and her court lay in their enchanted stasis, perfectly preserved by magic, the world beyond the briar patch was relentlessly ticking forward. We now turn our attention to the simple, yet profound, concept of 100 years pass. Imagine the seasons changing, not in a gentle cycle within the castle walls, but with a vibrant, unyielding energy outside. Spring's first green shoots would push through the soil, oblivious to the frozen palace. Summer's suns would bake the earth, autumn leaves would crisp and fall, and winter snows would blanket the land, melting and refreezing countless times. You can picture it, the quiet hum of the world, continuing its daily rhythm, entirely unconcerned with the stillness within the magical bubble. 100 years. Think about what that really means. It's not just a long time. It's a monumental stretch, enough for entire generations to be born, live their lives, and pass away. A child born when the princess fell asleep would be long gone, replaced by their children and their children's children. Grandparents would tell stories of their grandparents, telling stories of the sleeping palace, the truth becoming increasingly blurred by the mists of time, transforming from a news event into a deep-seated legend. The people who remembered the vibrant court, who lived in a world without the thorny barrier, would fade into history, leaving behind only the faintest echoes in the collective memory. This vast passage of time is a mainstream historical fact that gives the Sleeping Beauty myth its epic scope. It transforms a personal curse into a generational saga, underscoring the enduring power of the enchantment. It's a classic trope, isn't it? A hero or heroine lost to time, only to reappear in a completely different era. Except here, the hero is just snoozing, while everyone else does the heavy lifting of living and dying. It's a rather convenient way to avoid all the messy bits of historical progression, I suppose. Consider the changes that would have happened in the world outside during this century. Fashions would have shifted dramatically, from ruffs and elaborate gowns to simpler, perhaps more practical attire. Language would have evolved, with old words falling out of use and new idioms emerging. Technologies, even in a pre-industrial era, would have advanced. Imagine a bustling town just a few miles from the sleeping castle. Over 100 years, it might have grown into a small city, its buildings replaced, its customs altered. The world that the prince steps out of would be vastly different from the one the princess left behind. You'd probably find it utterly disorienting, wouldn't you? Waking up and finding that your smartphone is now a historical artifact. A quirky tidbit that sometimes gets overlooked is the notion of how the knowledge of the castle's existence persisted. It wasn't just a forgotten ruin. It remained a known, if enigmatic, landmark. Perhaps cartographers drew it on maps with a little note. Here be the sleeping castle. Do not disturb. Or perhaps local folklore kept it alive, with cautionary tales told to children who dared to wander too close to the thorny woods. The legend, as we discussed, became the castle's primary protector, deterring the curious but ill-equipped. Historians still argue whether the motif of 100-year sleep reflects ancient cyclical views of time and renewal, or if it simply provides a dramatic narrative gap for a new generation to emerge and resolve old curses. Regardless, this century-long interlude transforms the curse from a simple magical trick into a powerful statement about the nature of time itself and the patient, unyielding power of destiny. And as you picture those countless sunrises and sunsets painting the sky over the still, enchanted woods, you can almost feel the quiet weight of those 100 years drifting you deeper into your own calm slumber. After a century of silent slumber and a world that continued its unhurried march, the stage is finally set for the hero's predestined arrival. You can almost hear a faint, distant fanfare, not of trumpets, but of destiny itself, as the chosen prince enters the narrative. He's not just any prince, mind you, not one of those eager but ultimately clumsy adventurers we discussed earlier who vanished into the briars. No, this is the prince, the one whose birth coincided with the waning years of the princess's century-long nap, whose very existence was, perhaps, quietly ordained by the same benevolent magic that softened her curse. Imagine him now, a young man, perhaps in his late teens or early 20s, possessing that particular blend of earnestness and mild curiosity typical of fairy tale protagonists. He's not driven by a thirst for glory alone, but by something deeper, a quiet sense of purpose. Almost as if an invisible thread is gently tugging him towards the ancient, overgrown castle. He's heard the whispers. Of course, who hasn't? The legend of the Sleeping Beauty, by now, is firmly etched into the collective consciousness. A fantastical bedtime story, rather than a recent, terrifying event. It's no longer beware the sleeping palace, but have you heard the tale of the sleeping princess? His motivation isn't necessarily a grand quest for a wife, as some might assume. It's often portrayed as a noble curiosity, a desire to understand the mystery, perhaps even a gentle longing for a truth lost to time. He might be out hunting in the nearby woods, or simply exploring forgotten corners of his kingdom, when he stumbles upon the impenetrable thorn wall. Unlike the others, who saw only an obstacle, he senses something else, an invitation, perhaps, or a subtle pull of magic. You can picture him, his horse shying away from the dense briars, but the prince himself feeling an inexplicable draw, a quiet certainty that this place holds a secret meant for him. This destined arrival, occurring precisely at the end of the 100 years, is a mainstream historical fact in the myth. It underscores the precise, almost clockwork nature of the enchantment. The prince doesn't just happen upon the castle by chance. He arrives at the exact moment the spell is ready to unravel. It's almost as if the universe held its breath for a century, waiting for this specific individual to show up. It's the ultimate example of good timing, isn't it? Showing up just as the party is about to restart. A quirky tidbit found in some versions suggests that the prince isn't necessarily handsome or strong in the traditional heroic sense, but possesses a unique purity of heart or a certain gentle innocence that allows him to bypass the thorns where others failed. It's not about muscle, but about spirit, which is a rather refreshing twist on the usual knight-tensioning armor trope. This reinforces the idea that the curse isn't broken by force, but by a predestined, gentle touch. Historians still argue whether the motif of a destined hero reflects ancient beliefs in fate and divine intervention, or simply serves as a narrative device to streamline the plot and avoid messy details of multiple failed attempts. It imbues the story with a sense of inevitability and comfort, assuring the listener that the happy ending is not just possible, but guaranteed. And as you envision this young prince, drawn by an invisible thread towards the silent, briar-covered castle, you can almost feel the quiet stirring of anticipation, knowing that a long slumber is finally approaching its gentle conclusion, pulling you deeper into your own peaceful dreams. With the prince now standing before the formidable thorn wall, his gentle destiny guides him in navigating the thornwood. Unlike the frustrated attempts of previous adventurers, who vainly hacked and slashed at the dense briars, this prince's approach is different. You can almost feel the air shift around him, becoming softer, more yielding. The thorns, which had previously ensnared and repelled countless knights, now seem to part for him, not aggressively, but with a slow, almost reluctant grace. It's as if the enchantment itself recognizes his true purpose, sensing that he is the one, the destined key to unlock its century-long embrace. Imagine him walking, not forcing his way through, but rather finding subtle pathways, gaps that seem to appear just for him. The sharp, interlocking branches, which had formed an impenetrable barrier, now gently unlace themselves, creating narrow, twisting tunnels, just wide enough for a single person to pass. You can picture him stepping carefully, perhaps brushing aside a thorny vine that gently recoils from his touch. There's no struggle, no frantic hacking, just a quiet, deliberate movement forward. The rustle of the leaves as he passes would be the only sound, a soft whisper accompanying his predestined journey. This gentle, almost magical parting of the thorns is a mainstream historical fact in the most familiar versions of the myth. It's crucial because it highlights that the prince isn't breaking the curse through brute strength, but through the fulfillment of a predetermined destiny. His passage is an act of prophecy unfolding, not a feat of physical prowess. It's a bit like watching a key slide effortlessly into a lock that has resisted every other attempt that just fits. You'd probably find it rather satisfying, wouldn't you, after all those frustrated nights? The atmosphere here is one of profound quiet. The thorns themselves, instead of seeming menacing, become almost ethereal, forming a living tunnel that beckons him onward. The filtered light, dappled and green, would create a mesmerizing effect, drawing him deeper into the heart of the enchanted forest. You might notice the faint scent of old roses mingling with the damp earth, a subtle perfume that has permeated the air for 100 years. It's an oddly peaceful journey, a gentle stroll through a living, breathing labyrinth that only he can navigate. A quirky tidbit that sometimes appears in retellings is the idea that the briars only part for someone with a pure heart, or someone who approaches with true, unselfish intentions. This adds a layer of moralistic depth to the magic, suggesting that the enchantment responds not to strength, but to virtue. It makes you wonder what sort of intentions those other princes had, doesn't it? Perhaps they just wanted the fame or the fortune, or simply didn't listen to instructions. Historians still argue whether the motif of a natural barrier yielding to the chosen hero reflects ancient beliefs in a benevolent natural order, or simply serves to visually represent the magical power of destiny. It's a way of showing, rather than telling, that this prince is different, that his arrival marks the appointed time, And as you imagine him stepping softly through the quiet, yielding thornwood, each step bringing him closer to the slumbering palace, you can almost feel the quiet hum of magic surrounding him, drawing you deeper into your own calm, peaceful sleep. Having gently navigated the whispering thornwood, the prince at last emerges into the open, yet profoundly silent, expanse of the palace grounds, leading us into the silent halls entered. You stand there with him, at the threshold of this timeless domain, and a truly eerie quiet descends. It's not merely the absence of noise, it's a deep, palpable silence, the kind that presses in on you, making your own breath seem unnervingly loud. The air, as you step across the threshold, feels ancient, undisturbed, carrying the faint, almost imperceptible scent of dust and very old, forgotten perfume. Imagine the sheer spectacle before you. A grand courtyard, perhaps, or a sprawling formal garden, perfectly preserved, yet subtly claimed by nature. The stone pathways might have a thin, velvety layer of moss, worn smooth in patches, where 100 years of light wind has brushed over them. Statues stand frozen mid-gesture, their expressions serene, their surfaces perhaps softened by a century of gentle weathering. You might notice a forgotten ball or a child's toy, lying exactly where it was dropped 100 years ago, perfectly untouched, waiting for a game to resume. It's like stepping into a vast, meticulously crafted diorama, only it's entirely real and filled with the still forms of sleeping life. As you move deeper into the palace itself, the quiet intensifies. The massive doors, perhaps left ajar from the moment the spell struck, swing open with an almost imperceptible creak, revealing vast, silent chambers. Sunlight, filtered through dusty, cobweb-draped windows, casts long, pale columns of light onto the sleeping figures within. And there they are, frozen in time. Courtiers, guards, servants, all caught in a perpetual tableau. A footman might be mid-stride, carrying a tray that appears to be laden with fruit that remarkably hasn't withered. A guard, still standing at attention, leans gently against a wall, his spear still clutched in unmoving hands. Their faces are peaceful, their expressions calm, as if they've simply taken the most profound and synchronized nap in history. This eerie, undisturbed stillness within the palace is a mainstream historical fact in the narrative of the myth. It's what gives the Sleeping Beauty story its unique, almost dreamlike quality. Unlike other cursed places filled with shadows and decay, this palace is merely paused, waiting. It's an almost unsettling level of quiet, one that might make you feel as though you, too, should probably whisper, or risk disturbing a century of peace. You'd probably find yourself walking on tiptoe, wouldn't you, even though no one could possibly hear you. A quirky tidbit often pondered is the sheer density of the sleeping figures. Was every single person in the palace frozen, or only those directly linked to the royal household? Most tellings imply a complete, pervasive slumber, as if the magic seeped into every nook and cranny, touching every living thing within the castle walls. It makes you wonder about the palace pets. Did the royal spaniel curl up and snooze too? Or a particularly ambitious palace mouse? Historians still argue whether the motif of a perfectly preserved sleeping court reflects ancient desires for eternal youth and stasis, or simply serves to enhance the wonder and scale of the magical enchantment. It adds a layer of gentle surrealism to the narrative, inviting you to imagine stepping into a dream where everything is motionless and profoundly serene. As you continue your silent journey through these hushed halls, each sleeping figure a gentle reminder of the power of the spell. You can almost feel the deep tranquility of their long slumber, pulling you further into your own calm dreams. As the prince, and by extension, you, silently traverse the hushed corridors of the enchanted palace. Your gaze inevitably falls upon the numerous figures scattered throughout the silent halls, leading to the gradual uncovering sleeping figures. It's not a sudden discovery, but a slow, almost contemplative revelation as you move from room to room, each turn revealing another tableau of interrupted life. You find them in every conceivable posture. A cook leaning over a cold hearth, his wooden spoon half raised. A maid with a dust rag clutched loosely in her hand. Mid-sweep, a guardsman slumped against a wall, his helmet slightly askew, a faint smile on his lips. Imagine the sheer normalcy of their frozen expressions. There's no fear, no struggle, just a deep, peaceful repose. Their faces are unlined by age. Their clothes, though perhaps dusted with the accumulated grime of a century, show no signs of active decay. This stillness is profound, a complete cessation of animation that is both remarkable and slightly unsettling. It's like a particularly detailed wax museum. Only the figures are made of flesh and blood, simply taking the longest nap imaginable. You might find yourself instinctively whispering, even though no sound could possibly disturb their deep slumber. This widespread, perfectly preserved slumber of the entire court is a mainstream historical fact in the myth, crucial for conveying the sheer power and scope of the curse. It emphasizes that the enchantment wasn't selective. It enveloped everyone within the castle walls, from the highest noble to the lowest stable hand. It creates a complete, self-contained world of suspended animation, waiting for the designated moment of awakening. It's a rather efficient way to put an entire workforce on hold without having to pay them, isn't it? Very economical, magically speaking. As you wander, you might notice the intricate details. A book lying open on a table, its pages slightly yellowed but still readable. A half-finished game of chess, the pieces perfectly balanced on the board. A string of pearls caught mid-fall from a dressing table. Every item, every position tells a silent story of a moment abruptly halted, preserved in amber. It's a quiet testament to the magic's comprehensive reach, a force that literally stopped time for an entire community. You'd probably find it utterly fascinating, wouldn't you, piecing together the last moments of a century-old day. A quirky tidbit that often sparks discussion is whether the sleeping figures ever stirred, even slightly, during their century of slumber. The myth generally implies absolute stillness, but some fringe interpretations suggest a very subtle, almost imperceptible dreaming state for some, perhaps shifting slightly with the seasons, like plants turning towards the sun. Of course, this is pure speculation, but it adds to the eerie charm. Historians still argue whether the detailed portrayal of sleeping figures reflects ancient cultural anxieties about sudden, unexplained comas, or simply enhances the visual narrative of a deep enchantment. It's a powerful image, one that evokes both wonder and a gentle melancholy, hinting at lives put on hold, waiting for a future they cannot yet comprehend. And as you continue to discover these quiet, undisturbed figures, each one a silent guardian of the castle's secret, drawing you deeper into your own tranquil slumber. Guided by an unseen force, the prince finally reaches the culmination of his silent journey, leading him directly to the princess's chamber. You follow close behind, stepping into a room bathed in a soft, diffused light, perhaps filtering through heavy, ancient drapes that have kept the harshness of 100 years at bay. The air here feels even more still, more profoundly peaceful than anywhere else in the palace, as if the very essence of quiet slumber has coalesced in this sacred space. It's the kind of room where even a whisper would feel like a shout, a disturbance to an age-old calm. Imagine the chamber itself, grand yet intimate. A large, ornate bed, draped with heavy, perhaps faded, silks or velvets, stands at its center. The furniture is antique, exquisitely carved, but softened by the passage of time and the gentle blanket of dust. Perhaps a vanity table holds an array of delicate silver brushes and crystal bottles, each perfectly preserved. A half-read book might lie open on a bedside table, a ribbon bookmark still marking the exact page where the narrative of her waking life abruptly ceased. Every detail speaks of a life paused, a moment caught in a magical stasis. And there she is, the princess, lying peacefully on the bed, just as she was laid down a century ago. Her expression is serene, untouched by the passage of time, her features perfectly composed, as if merely dreaming a long, pleasant dream. Her hair, perhaps spread out on the pillow like a silken halo, might have the faintest shimmer of gold or raven black, depending on the version of the tale. Her hands are gently clasped, or perhaps one rests delicately on her chest, not with fear, but with a sense of profound wonder and a quiet reverence for the magic that holds her. This undisturbed state of the princess in her chamber is a mainstream historical fact in the myth, central to its romantic and comforting appeal. She is preserved as a timeless icon, awaiting her destined awakening, a symbol of beauty suspended beyond the reach of time. It's a testament to the power of the curse, but also to the benevolent modification that prevented it from being a sleep of death. You might even feel a pang of longing, a desire to understand what dreams she might be weaving in her century-long reverie. A quirky tidbit often discussed is the specific appearance of the princess's bedding. Some ancient tellings describe it as being woven with rare, magically imbued silk that itself contributed to her preservation, or perhaps a blanket woven from dreams themselves. It adds another layer of subtle magic to the scene, suggesting that even her immediate surroundings conspired to maintain her perfect repose. Historians still argue whether the motif of a sleeping, perfectly preserved maiden reflects ancient patriarchal ideals of female passivity, or simply serves as a narrative device to create a dramatic reawakening. Regardless, the atmosphere in her chamber is one of unparalleled tranquility, an almost sacred stillness that invites quiet contemplation as you stand there observing the sleeping beauty, bathed in that soft, filtered light. You can almost feel the profound peace of her slumber enveloping you, easing you deeper into your own calm dreams. You stand beside the prince, watching the princess in her deep, peaceful slumber, and then the most anticipated moment of the tale unfolds, the gentle awakening. It's not a dramatic Hollywood revival, no sudden gasps or theatrical leaps from the bed. Instead, it's a process as soft and subtle as a morning mist dissipating with the first rays of dawn. The prince, guided by an intuition that transcends words, leans down. In many versions, he simply kneels beside her, a gesture of reverence and gentleness, and then he offers a kiss. This kiss, you see, is not merely a romantic gesture. It's the magical trigger, the final perfect key to unlocking the century-long enchantment. It's not a forceful act, but a tender, almost imperceptible touch of destiny meeting fate. Imagine it. His lips barely brush her cheek, or perhaps her brow, and the magic, having run its course, simply unwinds. There's no sudden jolt, no fanfare. Her eyelids might flutter, just once, as softly as a butterfly's wings. A faint sigh might escape her lips, the first breath drawn in 100 years. Then her eyes slowly open. They wouldn't be wide with shock or fear, but rather soft, perhaps a little hazy, as if she's just woken from a particularly deep and satisfying nap. She might look at the prince, not with immediate recognition, but with a quiet curiosity, a gentle wonder. "Who are you?" she might whisper, her voice perhaps a little raspy from disuse, a century of silence finally broken. It's an incredibly understated moment, yet profoundly impactful, almost mundane in its quiet elegance, which is what makes it so incredibly soothing. You'd probably find yourself holding your breath, wouldn't you, waiting for that first gentle flicker of life. This gentle awakening, it signifies the precise moment the curse is lifted, not through violence or grand spells, but through a tender, predestined connection. It perfectly contrasts with the dramatic initial curse, emphasizing the soothing power of love and destiny over malevolent magic. As the princess awakens, you might notice the first subtle stirrings of the room around her. Perhaps a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air, or the slightest shimmer in the dusty sunlight. The magic isn't just about her, it's tied to the entire kingdom. So, her awakening is the first ripple in a pond that has been utterly still for 100 years. It's a delightful, quiet miracle, unfolding before your very eyes. A quirky tidbit, often debated among folklore enthusiasts, is whether the princess truly feels the passage of time, or if her century-long sleep felt like mere moments. Most interpretations suggest the latter, making her awakening less disorienting and more like picking up where she left off. Save for the sudden appearance of a strange prince. It's the ultimate sleep-in, isn't it? Waking up and realizing you've accidentally slept through a whole century. Imagine the jet lag. Historians still argue whether the motif of a kiss awakening a sleeping maiden reflects ancient symbolic connections between breath, soul, and human contact, or simply serves as a romanticized narrative device to signify the breaking of the spell. Regardless, the atmosphere of this moment is one of immense calm, a profound peace gently giving way to the soft return of life. And as you witness this tender, understated reawakening, you can almost feel the gentle shift from deep slumber to the soft stirring of consciousness, lulling you deeper into your own quiet dreams. With the princess's eyes gently open, the magic, like a slowly deflating balloon, begins to release its century-long hold on the entire castle, leading to the miraculous reawakening the kingdom. You're no longer just observing the princess. You're witnessing the slow, incredible return of life to every corner of the vast palace, like watching a time-lapse video of a hibernating forest coming back to life in spring. Imagine the quiet clicks and murmurs. That footman, frozen mid-stride with his tray, now takes his next step, perhaps a little stiffly at first, the forgotten fruit on his tray remarkably unblemished. The cook, still leaning over the cold hearth, blinks slowly, then perhaps lets out a quiet sigh as the aroma of something suddenly fills the air. Perhaps the lingering scent of the stew he was preparing a century ago, or the faintest hint of warm bread from the oven. Even the palace cat, curled on the windowsill, might stretch languidly, letting out a soft, contented purr that has been delayed by 100 years. The sounds, too, would slowly return, not a cacophony, but a gentle reintroduction. The distant clatter of a dropped pot in the kitchen, a hushed murmur from a waking guard, the soft rustle of silken gowns as ladies in waiting slowly stir. It's an auditory awakening, gradually filling the profound silence that has reigned for so long. The dust motes, once suspended, might now begin to dance more vigorously in the sunbeams, disturbed by the subtle currents of rediscovered life. You can almost feel the air in the castle lighten, losing its ancient stillness and filling with the faint, warm breath of humanity. This simultaneous reawakening of the entire kingdom is a mainstream historical fact in the myth, crucial to its fantastical charm. It underscores the pervasive nature of the curse. It's a beautifully orchestrated magical event, a grand cosmic alarm clock finally ringing for everyone. It makes you wonder how long it took everyone to realize a century had passed. Mourning, everyone. Oh, has it been that long? As people begin to stir, their initial reactions would likely be confusion rather than immediate understanding. Imagine waking up from a perfectly ordinary nap to find that everyone else in your house is also just stirring, and none of you can remember what you were doing yesterday, let alone what century it is. There might be confused whispers, soft stretches, and perhaps the faint, collective clunk of swords dropping from the hands of suddenly awake guards. It's a very gentle chaos, a soft unraveling of a century-long enchantment. A quirky tidbit sometimes considered is the idea that the magic that preserved them also gently restored their awareness, allowing them to pick up their lives seamlessly, albeit with a monumental time gap. It's a bit like a computer going into sleep mode and waking up perfectly where it left off. But after a really, really long system update, historians still argue whether the motif of a collective awakening reflects ancient communal living structures and the importance of a ruler to their people's well-being, or if it's simply a narrative device to create a more impactful and visually striking conclusion to the curse. Regardless, this moment is filled with a soft wonder, a quiet magic, as an entire world slowly, peacefully, and almost imperceptibly returns to life. And as you imagine this gentle reawakening, the sounds and sights slowly blossoming around you, you can almost feel your own consciousness stirring from a deep, calm slumber, easing you further into peaceful dreams. As the kingdom slowly stirred back to life, the most immediate and charming manifestation of the reawakening appeared in the palace's dining hall, leading to a feast prepared in moments. You can imagine the scene, the grand banquet table, which had been set for a royal feast 100 years ago, still laden with platters that once held succulent roasts, vibrant fruits, and glistening pastries. The goblets stood ready, perhaps still half filled with wine that now sparkled as if freshly poured. It was a tableau of interrupted indulgence, preserved perfectly by the enchantment. Then, as the magic unwound and life flowed back into the palace, a truly remarkable thing happened. That half-peeled potato in the scullery hand, you remember, it would suddenly be peeled completely. The chef, who had been mid-reach for a spice, would complete his gesture, and the simmering stew on the hearth, untouched for a century, would miraculously resume its gentle bubble, its aroma wafting through the reawakening kitchen, as if no time had passed. The fires, long dormant, would flicker back to life in the hearths, casting warm, dancing light on the dusty walls. It's not just that the food reappeared or resumed cooking. It's that the preparations continued precisely from where they had left off. Imagine the sheer delightful absurdity of it. 100-year-old meal suddenly finishing its cooking process. The baker, who had been kneading dough, would complete the final motions, and the unbaked bread in the oven would swell and turn golden, suddenly emitting the comforting smell of freshly baked goods. It's as if the palace had been running on a magical timer, set to resume its culinary operations exactly 1 century later. You'd probably be rather hungry, wouldn't you, after waiting 100 years for dinner? This immediate, magical completion of the feast is a mainstream historical fact in the myth, often highlighted as a charming detail of the curse's dissolution. It underscores the profound, comprehensive nature of the magic, which not only paused life, but also suspended the natural processes of decay and left things ready to resume at a moment's notice. It turns the grand banquet into a symbol of life's triumphant return, a celebration that was merely delayed, not cancelled. The sudden continuation of such a complex event, like a full royal feast, also serves to gently disorient the newly awakened inhabitants. Imagine a courtier blinking himself awake, only to find a platter of perfectly cooked game suddenly appearing before him as if conjured from thin air. It adds to the dreamlike quality of the awakening, making the transition from deep sleep to vibrant reality all the more seamless and, dare I say, slightly bewildering. 1 minute you're mid-conversation, the next, dinner is suddenly ready, a century later, very efficient, if a little confusing for table manners. A quirky tidbit often debated is whether the food itself, after 100 years, would truly be palatable. Most versions of the myth suggest it is, thanks to the magic, but some slightly more cynical interpretations hint that perhaps the first meal wasn't quite as fresh as it seemed. But then, who's going to complain after a century-long fast? Anything would taste good. Historians still argue whether the motif of an instantaneously completed feast reflects ancient desires for abundance and magical provision, or if it simply provides a convenient narrative device to bring the newly awakened kingdom together in celebration. It certainly makes for a picturesque and comforting scene, inviting you to imagine the gentle sounds of renewed activity, the clinking of goblets, and the soft murmurs of conversation slowly filling the air. And as you picture this magical banquet materializing as if by magic, you can almost feel the gentle hum of contentment lulling you deeper into your own peaceful, well-fed dreams. It's a bit like trying to trace the first drop of rain in a vast ocean. Many sources contribute, and pinpointing a single origin can be surprisingly difficult. At its core, the debate often revolves around the myth's symbolic meaning. Is it a cautionary tale about the dangers of curiosity, particularly for young women? Or is it a reflection of societal anxieties about rites of passage, particularly the transition from childhood to adulthood, often symbolized by the prick of the spindle and the onset of a new, transformative state? You might find yourself pondering these very questions as you drift deeper into the story, wondering what deeper truths these ancient narratives were trying to convey. It's always fascinating how seemingly simple tales can hide layers of complex cultural meaning, isn't it? Much like finding an unexpected philosophical message tucked into a particularly fluffy cloud. One prominent theory among scholars is that the Sleeping Beauty myth, or at least its core elements, derives from older fertility myths or seasonal myths. In this interpretation, the princess's long sleep represents the barrenness of winter, a period when nature itself seems to die and lie dormant. Her awakening, then, symbolizes the return of spring, the rebirth of life and fertility to the land. The thorns, in this context, might represent the harshness of winter or the protective, but ultimately temporary, barrier that holds back the new season. This view connects the personal narrative of the princess to the grand, cyclical rhythms of the natural world, suggesting a universal human understanding of death, dormancy, and renewal. Is a symbolic representation of menstruation or a sexual awakening, leading to a profound change in the girl's life and status. The 100-year sleep, then, is a dramatic exaggeration of this period of maturation. Historians still argue whether such interpretations impose modern psychological frameworks onto ancient narratives or genuinely uncover their original "it's a chicken and egg" situation. Trying to figure out if the symbolism was intentional from the start or simply emerged organically over centuries of storytelling. A quirky tidbit that sometimes surfaces in these academic discussions is the potential influence of ancient trance states or prolonged comas on the myth's development. Such real-world phenomena might have provided the eerie kernel from which the fantastical elements grew. It's a rather unsettling thought, isn't it, that some of our most soothing tales might have roots in terrifying medical mysteries. Fate and awakening, or in its adaptable structure that allows for varied cultural interpretations. Regardless of its precise origins, the Sleeping Beauty myth remains a powerful example of how human societies have grappled with concepts of time, change, and the mysterious power of slumber, continuing to offer a gentle, contemplative space for dreaming minds. Enchanted sleep isn't unique to European folklore, leading us to explore global variants of sleep tales. You see, the human fascination with slumber, altered states, and magical awakenings seems to be a universal phenomenon, appearing in surprisingly similar narratives across continents and cultures. It's a bit like finding the same comforting melody played on different instruments around the world. Imagine journeys to ancient lands, far removed from the briar-covered castles of Europe. You might encounter myths from Asian traditions, for instance, where heroes and heroines fall into enchanted sleeps, sometimes for centuries, and awaken to new worlds or fulfill ancient prophecies. In some Chinese or Japanese legends, figures might enter a magical coma. These aren't always about a princess waiting for a prince. Sometimes it's a hermit or a sage whose awakening marks a significant turning point for their community. The sleep itself is often portrayed as a contemplative, transformative period, rather than merely a curse. You'd probably find that quite appealing, wouldn't you? A nap that comes with enlightenment? Sign me up. Then, consider the rich tapestry of African folklore. While not always featuring a sleeping beauty in the European sense, many myths from various African cultures involve individuals or communities being put into trance-like states or suspended animations by powerful spirits or ancestral magic. These might be for protection or as a test, or even as a form of divine punishment or blessing. The concept of suspended animation for an entire village, hidden away by magic, feels remarkably close to our sleeping kingdom, doesn't it? Even in the Americas, pre-Columbian myths tell of heroes or deities who enter long periods of slumber or retreat into hidden realms, promising to return when their people need them most. Guardians awaiting the opportune moment to re-emerge. The idea of a powerful figure sleeping beneath a mountain, waiting for the right time to awaken and save their people, carries a similar emotional resonance to the Sleeping Beauty, albeit with a focus on collective salvation rather than individual romance. It speaks to a shared human hope that even in the darkest times, there is a dormant power waiting to awaken. The underlying human fascination with sleep as a liminal state, a gateway between worlds, or a period of profound transformation, is deeply ingrained in our collective psyche. It's almost as if the concept of taking a long, restorative nap and waking up to a better world is a universal dream. A quirky tidbit that often arises is the symbolic role of the vegetative state in these global myths. The idea of a person or a land becoming dormant, like a seed in winter, waiting for the right conditions to sprout anew, is a powerful and recurrent image. It often emphasizes themes of patience, natural cycles, and the inevitability of renewal. Historians still argue whether these global similarities are due to diffusion or independent invention. It's a fascinating puzzle, and one that reminds us that the stories we tell ourselves about sleep, dreams, and awakening are deeply connected, no matter where we are in the world. And as you contemplate this vast global tapestry of slumbering tales, you can feel yourself drifting deeper into your own peaceful dreams. Building upon the fascinating global recurrences of sleep myths, we can now gently shift our focus to the deeper meanings embedded within these tales, exploring their psychological interpretations. You see, beyond the charming princes and the thorny hedges, stories like Sleeping Beauty offer a rich ground for understanding the human psyche, touching upon universal archetypes and the very nature of dreams and consciousness. It's like looking at a familiar painting and suddenly noticing all the subtle brushstrokes that give it depth and meaning. Imagine the princess's century-long sleep not just as a magical curse, but as a profound liminal state. In psychological terms, a liminal state is a transitional period, a threshold between two phases of existence. The princess is no longer a child, but not yet an adult. She's neither truly alive in the active sense, nor truly dead. This long sleep could symbolize the often unconscious process of maturation, a period of internal growth and development that happens before one is ready to engage with the world as a fully formed individual. You can certainly relate to that, can't you? Those periods in your own life where you felt a bit stuck or in between, waiting for clarity or growth before moving forward. It's a very comforting thought, really, that sometimes the best way to grow is to simply pause and let things unfold internally. The dreamlike quality of the myth is another powerful psychological aspect. The entire kingdom is suspended in a kind of collective dream, a quiet, unchanging world, untouched by the passage of time. This resonates deeply with our own experiences of dreaming, where hours can feel like moments, and reality can be fluid and surreal. The prince's entry into this dream world can be seen as the intrusion of conscious reality, the force that begins to pull the sleepers back to wakefulness. It highlights the often blurry line between our waking lives and our inner dreamscapes, and how profoundly one can influence the other. Furthermore, the characters themselves can be viewed as archetypes, universal patterns of human behavior and experience. The sleeping princess embodies innocence, vulnerability, and the dormant feminine principle awaiting activation. The prince represents the animus, the active, conscious force, or the principle of individuation that helps to integrate disparate parts of the self. Even the wicked fairy can be seen as the shadow aspect, the unacknowledged or repressed parts of the psyche that can create internal blocks. This isn't just about heroes and villains. It's about the various forces at play within all of us. You might even spot a little bit of the grumpy fairy in yourself on a Monday morning, couldn't you? This archetypal interpretation is a mainstream historical fact in various schools of psychology, particularly Jungian analysis, which sees fairy tales as collective expressions of the human unconscious. The persistence of these stories, they argue, is precisely because they tap into universal human experiences and psychological patterns, offering symbolic solutions or insights into life's challenges. A quirky tidbit sometimes explored is the idea that the prick itself is a symbolic wound, a necessary trauma or initiation that sets the stage for transformation. It's not just a physical injury, but a psychological trigger that initiates a profound internal change, leading to the long period of integration that is the sleep. Historians still argue whether these psychological interpretations were consciously intended by the original storytellers, or whether they are post hoc analyses that reflect modern psychological understanding. Regardless, understanding the Sleeping Beauty myth through a psychological lens offers a richer, more nuanced appreciation of its enduring power. It reminds us that even in our deepest slumbers, profound internal work might be taking place, preparing us for our own gentle awakenings into new phases of life. And as you consider these deeper meanings, your mind can slowly, gently drift into its own quiet, insightful dreams. From the fascinating realm of psychological interpretations, we now gently transition to how the Sleeping Beauty myth has transcended its origins to influence countless forms of artistic expression, exploring Sleeping Beauty's legacy. You see, this tale, with its potent imagery of a century-long slumber, a thorny castle, and a gentle awakening, has captivated artists, writers, and composers for centuries, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. It's a bit like a perfectly preserved antique, inspiring endless reinterpretations while retaining its timeless appeal. Imagine the countless ballets that have graced stages worldwide, most famously Tchaikovsky's magnificent Sleeping Beauty. You can almost hear the soaring strings, the delicate flutes, the majestic trumpets, all telling the story through movement and music. The Rose Adagio, where Aurora dances with her four suitors, embodies the youthful innocence before the curse, while the Grand Awakening scene is often a breathtaking display of grace and anticipation. This transformation from a whispered story to a full-blown, elaborate ballet is a testament to the tale's inherent drama and visual appeal. It proves that some stories are just begging to be danced. Then, consider the myriad of literary adaptations beyond the classic versions by Perrault and the Brothers Grimm. Novelists have reimagined the princess's century-long experience, exploring her dreams, the changes in the world she awakens to, and the inner lives of the characters with greater depth. Poets have used the imagery of sleep and thorns as metaphors for various human conditions: scintillation, waiting, the passage of time. You'd probably find it rather intriguing, wouldn't you, reading a diary from someone who slept for 100 years. Imagine the blank pages. Of course, we cannot forget the pervasive influence on film and animation, particularly Disney's iconic 1959 animated feature. This version solidified many of the visual and narrative elements that are now synonymous with the tale for modern audiences. From Maleficent's dramatic entrance to the vibrant colors of the Enchanted Forest, this film, in particular, cemented Sleeping Beauty's place as a cultural touchstone, shaping how generations perceive the myth. It's a prime example of how one artistic interpretation can become the dominant version in the public consciousness. For better or for worse, this widespread and diverse adaptation across various art forms is a mainstream historical fact, demonstrating the myth's incredible versatility and enduring resonance. It suggests that the core narrative elements are so powerful that they can be reinterpreted to suit different artistic mediums and cultural contexts, yet still maintain their essential charm. A quirky tidbit often debated is whether these modern adaptations, particularly those that inject more action or revise character motivations, dilute the original quieter essence of the tale. Does a dragon fight really belong in a story about gentle slumber? Some purists might argue no, but others might say it keeps the story fresh for new audiences. Historians still argue whether the continuous reinterpretation of classic myths reflects a human need to update old stories for new generations, or simply demonstrates the inherent adaptability of compelling narratives. Regardless of how it's told, the legacy of Sleeping Beauty continues to weave its way through our cultural fabric, offering a soothing, timeless narrative of pause and renewal. And as you consider how this ancient tale has gracefully unfolded across stages, pages, and screens, you can almost feel the gentle hum of creativity lulling you deeper into your own peaceful dreams. Having explored the extensive legacy of the Sleeping Beauty myth in various art forms, let's now consider the deeper, more comforting themes that reside at its very heart, particularly the comfort of cycles. You see, beneath the magic and the romance, this tale offers a profound reassurance about the natural rhythms of life, death, rest, and renewal. It's a story that implicitly tells us that even the longest pause is merely a part of a larger, ongoing cycle, much like the changing seasons or the ebb and flow of the tides. Imagine the absolute stillness of winter, when the world seems to hold its breath, every tree bare, every field dormant. Yet we know, instinctively, that spring will return, bringing with it new life, fresh green shoots, and a burst of vibrant color. The Sleeping Beauty myth mirrors this natural phenomenon. The princess's sleep is that long winter, a period of apparent inactivity, but one that is essential for the eventual blossoming of new life and new beginnings. It teaches us that sometimes profound rest is not an end, but a necessary prelude to renewal. You've probably felt it yourself, haven't you? That feeling after a truly restorative nap, when the world seems a little brighter, a little clearer. It's the small, personal echo of a grand, ancient cycle. The story gently reassures us that even when things seem utterly stopped or forgotten, there's an underlying current of life and possibility waiting to resurface. The thorns that grow around the castle, remember, they are a protective barrier, not a permanent prison. They guard the slumbering life within, ensuring its safety until the appointed time of awakening. This natural growth, though formidable, is part of the cycle, ultimately yielding to the predestined force that brings new life. It's a comforting thought, isn't it, that even the obstacles we face might, in a strange way, be serving to protect something precious within us, waiting for its moment to emerge. This emphasis on cyclical patterns of rest and renewal is a mainstream historical fact in many ancient myths and folktales across various cultures. It reflects a fundamental human understanding of the world, based on observable natural phenomena. From the daily cycle of day and night to the annual cycle of seasons, and even the human life cycle. The idea of an ending that leads to a new beginning is deeply ingrained. The Sleeping Beauty myth simply applies this grand cosmic rhythm to the scale of a human life, giving it a personal, relatable touch. A quirky tidbit often pondered is whether the 100-year duration of the sleep is purely symbolic, representing a full cycle or a generation's passing, rather than a literal, precise measurement of time. It reinforces the idea that some things simply take their own time and cannot be rushed. It's a rather patient sort of magic, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the prevalence of cyclical themes in folklore reflects an inherent human desire for predictability and order in an unpredictable world, or if it simply stems from ancient agricultural societies' reliance on seasonal patterns. Regardless, the comfort of cycles in the Sleeping Beauty myth offers a gentle promise that even in moments of profound stillness or uncertainty, life is always preparing for its next gentle awakening. And as you contemplate this soothing rhythm of rest and renewal, you can feel your own mind drifting, quietly embracing the comfort of its own cycles, easing you deeper into your peaceful slumber. Having embraced the comforting notion of life's cycles, let's bring our story closer to a gentle landing by considering what happens beyond the happily ever after. You see, most fairy tales end precisely at that moment. The kiss, the awakening, the grand feast, perhaps a wedding, fin. But the Sleeping Beauty myth, especially if you ponder its implications, subtly invites you to consider the very real, often mundane, realities that follow such an extraordinary event. It's a bit like imagining what happens after the credits roll on a blockbuster movie. Someone still has to clean up the popcorn. Imagine the princess, now awake, facing a world that has leapfrogged a century. Her parents, her court, are all just waking up, perhaps a little disoriented, still dressed in clothes from a bygone era. You can picture the initial joyous confusion. Oh, darling, you're awake. And what is that strange contraption they call a telephone? The world they knew is gone, replaced by new technologies, new social customs, perhaps even new languages. It's a truly massive culture shock, isn't it? Imagine waking up from a nap and finding everyone's driving self-driving cars and communicating through brain implants. The royal couple would probably need a very, very long debriefing session, and perhaps a few strong cups of royal tea. Then there's the prince. He's the hero, yes, but he's also just brought a medieval kingdom into a perhaps early modern one. He's essentially married someone from the 15th century and brought her to the 16th or 17th. There would be endless adjustments. The princess would need to learn about new inventions, new etiquette, new dances. She'd probably be utterly bewildered by the changes in fashion. You mean people don't wear those enormous ruffs anymore? How terribly practical. It's charming to think about, isn't it? The gentle humor of these two worlds colliding. This practical aftermath, though rarely depicted in the core myth, is a mainstream historical fact of human existence. Even the grandest magical events lead to everyday challenges. The story focuses on the magical solution, but the mundane reality still awaits. It highlights that true happiness isn't just about breaking a spell, but about adapting to new circumstances and building a life together. Regardless of how many centuries you've slept through, a quirky tidbit sometimes explored in later retellings is the idea of the emotional toll on the princess. Did she ever feel a sense of loss for the world she left behind? Did she grapple with survivor's guilt, having slept through generations of human history. These are the quiet, introspective questions that add depth to a seemingly simple narrative, inviting you to ponder the deeper psychological adjustments that would inevitably follow such a profound experience. It's not just about waking up, it's about processing waking up. Historians still argue whether the omission of post-awakening details in classical fairy tales reflects the storytelling focus on the event rather than the process, or simply assumes that happily ever after means an end to all narrative tension. Regardless, this gentle contemplation of what comes after the grand magical moment adds a quiet realism to the fantasy, grounding it in the enduring human experience of change and adaptation. And as you consider these gentle transitions beyond the dramatic ending, imagining the quiet adjustments and gentle hum of new routines, you can feel yourself drifting softly towards your own peaceful slumber, knowing that even the biggest adventures eventually settle into a comforting rhythm. As our journey through the peaceful slumbers of the Sleeping Beauty myth draws to a close, let's reflect on the ultimate, most comforting takeaway: the enduring allure of sleep. You see, beyond the curses, the princes, and the enchanted castles, this tale resonates so deeply because it touches upon something profoundly universal and intrinsically soothing: the power and mystery of sleep itself. It reminds us that sleep isn't merely an absence of consciousness, but a vital, restorative state, a gentle pause that allows for renewal and sometimes even miraculous transformation. Imagine the absolute peace of that century-long slumber. No worries, no responsibilities, no deadlines, just profound, uninterrupted rest. While in reality, such a long nap might come with some serious bed sores. In the realm of myth, it's portrayed as a state of perfect preservation, a blissful escape from the relentless march of time and the everyday stresses of life. It's the ultimate form of self-care, isn't it? A magical reset button. You can almost feel the gentle release of tension, the quiet letting go that sleep promises. The story implicitly glorifies this restful state. The princess isn't depicted as suffering during her sleep. She's serene, beautiful, perfectly preserved. The entire court is at peace. This contrasts sharply with many other fairy tales, where prolonged unconsciousness might be a sign of illness or a truly grim fate. Here, sleep is a protective cocoon, a benevolent force that shelters life until the opportune moment for awakening. It speaks to a deep human longing for respite, for a period where the world can simply carry on without our active participation, allowing us to recharge completely. This positive portrayal of sleep, even when magically induced, is a mainstream historical fact in many cultures, often seen as a gateway to dreams, divine messages, or simply profound healing. It's why lullabies are so universal, why bedtime stories like this one exist, to gently guide us into that sacred, restful space. The myth, in its quiet way, validates our own need for deep rest, reminding us that pausing is not a weakness, but a strength, a necessary part of growth and renewal. A quirky tidbit that sometimes comes up is the idea that the princess, while physically dormant, was incredibly active in her dream world, perhaps weaving the very tapestry of her future awakening or engaging with ancient wisdom. It adds a fascinating layer to the sleep, transforming it into an active, albeit internal, journey. Historians still argue whether the consistent, positive portrayal of sleep in such myths reflects an ancient understanding of its restorative properties or simply serves as a narrative device to make a cursed state more palatable for storytelling. Regardless, the enduring allure of sleep in the Sleeping Beauty myth offers a gentle, reassuring message. It reminds us that just as the princess woke, refreshed and ready for a new life, so too can we find renewal and strength in our own nightly journeys into slumber. It's a quiet promise that every ending is simply a new beginning waiting to unfold, and that rest is the perfect bridge between the two. So, as the story closes, and the soft sounds of the reawakened kingdom fade into a gentle hum, allow yourself to drift further into your own quiet comfort. Imagine the world outside your window softening, blurring, as the night embraces you. Feel your muscles relax, your breathing deepen. You've journeyed through centuries of magic and slumber, and now it's time for your own peaceful rest. Let the lingering images of silent castles and gently parting thorns, of tranquil awakenings and the quiet continuation of life, guide you. All is calm, all is still, and all is well. Just like the princess, you are safe, you are warm, and you are perfectly poised for your own restorative slumber.